Billionaires should not exist. Hi, I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle now. And Bill,
let me guess. I'm going to go with Frank Sinatra.
It was indeed Old Blue Eyes. He's back. In this
Red
case,
Eyes.
in the form of not only Bernie Sanders, but actually Elizabeth Warren as well, two of the top three leading Democrat candidates. Bernie Sanders, who seems to have lost the big mo since his 2016 run for the presidency, has tried to recapture it by essentially releasing a plan for taxation on wealth in the wake of Elizabeth Warren's release of her plan for taxation on wealth. And we're not talking about income here. We're talking about taxing actual wealth, assets that are already in the possession of the individual. Bernie Sanders' plan actually calls for believe it or not, a progressive tax on wealth. And it would start at about 1% for people whose net worth as a married couple is over $32 million and escalate from there until if your net worth is $10 billion or more, you're being taxed on that wealth, an 8% assessment on that. Sanders estimates, Bill, that this will bring in some $4.35 trillion over the next 10 years, where Elizabeth Sanders' parsimonious plan only brings in $2.75 trillion. First of all, let me just ask you this, Bill. President Trump has unleashed the hounds of populism, and is he now about to mix his metaphor and reap what he has sown?
Woof. If he's unleashed the hounds of populism, then woof.
Now, you know what I mean, because he's basically ginned up all this. Somebody is screwing you, man. And the Democrats are saying, yeah, somebody is screwing you. It's the millionaires and billionaires and the corporate fat
millionaires
cats.
and billionaires. It's interesting because I would be willing to bet you anything more than, let's say, at least 4, 5, 6 years ago, tops, Bernie Sanders would have said there should be no such thing as millionaires either. And then he became one. And now it's billionaires. And he said that it's inconceivable that you could ever own more than one house. It was not just greedy, it was evil. Well, now he's got 3. So expect as the general prosperity of the country increases, expect Bernie Sanders' personal yardstick for what is too much to continue to rise along with it.
Do you think he'll move beyond just using that one type of generic deodorant?
Actually, it's funny you say that, Scott, because I didn't hear the end of the sentence before I already knew the answer. Right when you got, do you think it's possible for Bernie Sanders to move beyond? Right then, I just said no. Just period, no. He is one of the most, he's certainly one of the most interesting people in politics. But for people who don't know his story, I mean, he's a guy who never had a job in his life, lived off of girlfriends, bummed money off of girlfriends, then dried them out and moved on to somebody else. First job he ever had was mayor of Burlington. And the guy is a complete and utter loon. He's just the most unpleasant candidate I've ever seen. He makes Ross Perot look like George Clooney. I mean, he's just shockingly awful. And the fact
does he cast new light on the charms of Hillary Clinton for you?
Well, just between the two of us. I don't want to do this anymore, Scott.
I don't blame you. Well, here's the thing, Bill, and I think this, obviously, you've got 2 major Democratic candidates who do not operate out there on the trapeze without a net. In other words, they're doing a lot of polling, a lot of focus groups, and what they're hearing, at least from the Democratic base that could lead them to a primary victory, is that Americans want to stick it to these billionaires because nobody believes that anybody can be worth billions of dollars.
I'll disagree with that assessment and destroy anybody who dares to disagree with me. But since they're not here to speak, let me just throw a couple things in. First of all, it's pointless. It's utterly pointless to point out that the top 5% of the population pays 60% of the taxes. It's pointless to point that out because they don't care. It's pointless to point out, as I did in a video called Eat the Rich, which maybe we can link to here, that if you took all of the money, not 10% or 8% or measly stuff, no, I mean all of the money, all of it, that people over $1 million had, you run the country for 2 months, maybe 3, something like that at the most. We spend $10 billion a day, Scotty. That means that one of the Charles Koch, for example, if you took everything from him, you could run the government for 4 days. And then it's gone. But these things don't matter to these people. The Democratic primary now is being spun towards the loudest and most vocal people, and these are the people who want stuff. They want stuff. They are not going to be having anything taken away from them because they don't really have anything. They're social justice warriors, and I've seen these just bat guano crazy old women who who said to my face they would rather see everybody getting the same, even if it meant everybody had to live in the gutter and in the mud with parasites. They're just diseased people. They're filled with envy, and they're filled with just this bizarre kind of hatred for anything that's better than what they have, which is in most of those cases, most things. So look, here's the thing. It's another example of what we've been watching for this entire cycle since 2018 and AOC's election. We're watching the left go further and further and further out there. And I don't want to keep saying as I predicted, but as I predicted, each one of these people now is going to be desperate to mark out a new position. The virtue signaling is strong with this one. And as the virtue signaling continues, because it's really all they don't have policies, they don't have sensible policies. As the virtue signaling continues, the Olympics continue, we're going to see higher and higher scores, faster and faster times, longer and longer jumps, until finally, by the time that the nominee is selected for the Democrats, what they're going to have been committed to is going to be so astonishing to the American people that I think they're just going to lose it in a landslide. I don't think the bulk of the working class of the Democratic Party, what used to be the Democratic Party, I don't think that they would agree with this idea that there should be no such thing as billionaires. The entire idea of America, as opposed to Europe, is in Europe, somebody drives by with a nice car and you say, well, no one should have a car like that. In America, somebody drives by with a nice car. You say, I'd like to get a car like that, and I think I can.
Some of our viewers may be old enough to remember Robin Leach and the series The Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. Bill, you know, of course, that America was watching that show just so that they could seethe with rage at those wealthy people, were they not?
That's not what they were doing. Nobody puts themselves in front of a show to seethe with rage. Seething with rage is not a pleasant feeling.
MSNBC notwithstanding.
Well, needless to say, but they get I was going to say they get well paid for it, but literally hundreds of people are watching that network at any given time. But people would watch Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, and they would watch the Kardashians as well, not because they're watching it seething with rage. They're watching it at the base level of a kind of curiosity of what those kind of lives are. And on most levels, for people who are big fans of those shows, it is a vicarious sort of a thrill to be able to live that kind of life. This is why all the celebrity gossip magazines have the draw they have, and People magazine and all this other stuff. Let's look inside Jennifer Aniston's home. Who cares? But
no, Bill, let me say, I am in possession of a virtually priceless degree in the field of journalism. And so I say that only to say I'm no mathematologist. However, if you tax somebody's wealth, let's say a $10 billion treasure trove at 8%, that would mean that in order to keep it at $10 billion, that person's going to have to earn at least 8% on his money that year just to stay even. And in fact, Bernie Sanders, who apparently is a mathematologist, points out that within 15 years, he can cut the wealth of America's billionaires in half. Tell me what you see for the future of a country where things are much more egalitarian and we just have a bunch of sort of half billionaires running around.
My first knee-jerk reaction to this is, in a club of billionaires, the guy with 900 million is a chump, but he's serving the coffee, right? So this whole idea of wealth and poverty is essentially the front end and the back end of a bell curve, and that bell curve can move up and down relative to total wealth. Well, relative to whether you live in an apartment, or whether you live in a palace, or whether you live in a dirt floor hut, that bell curve of wealth moves. And it should be moving up. The whole bell curve should be moving to people being more wealthy, because that means, and that is precisely what is happening, by the way. It's precisely what's been happening in America. It's explosively happening overseas. So when people say we want to eliminate poverty, we have to be honest here. I've lived in pretty serious poverty for 25, 30 years, and I've been just sick to my stomach worrying about how I'm going to pay the rent for 20 years of my life. So you don't get to say, oh, you're rich. I know what this is like. But to say that we're going to eliminate the back end of, let's say, 20% of the bell curve, just going to cut it off and eliminate it, it's just plain insane. If you were to take the bottom 20% of the American people and just inject enough money so that they were above the poverty line, you'd still have a bell curve and you'd still have people who are richer and poorer, and your definition of poverty would go up. And the definition of poverty has gone up enormously in this country. Poor people now, air conditioning and cell phones and $200 sneakers. This is common in poor America. And America's the first country in the world ever in history whose primary health problem among poor people is obesity. There's too much food for them, too much calories. So all of this said, doesn't matter. None of it matters. Bernie Sanders is appealing to people's most base instinct, and he's doing it in the most base way. I would not admire a person, but at the very least, I would not be disgusted by a person who said that no one should be able to have 3 houses and then meant it. And then turned money away. He sold a book and then he just kept enough to pay the rent on his house, or maybe he bought the mortgage off on his little cottage in Vermont and sent the rest of the money to homeless relief. That guy I would disagree with, but at the very least, you could say that person believes what they say. How can this guy be taken seriously? How can millions of people take it seriously? The millions of people who do take it seriously are the millions of people who want something for nothing. And they call themselves socialists, but they're not. And the reason I know they're not is because when you ask these people, like these social justice warriors who are big on Bernie in 2016, you say, hey, okay, just redistribute the wealth and spread it around. Great. Let's take your cell phones and we'll take them down to a pawn shop. And we'll cash them in and we'll take $2,000 and we'll go around town and we'll spread $120 bills around to homeless people. Bring them down. Let's go. They won't do it. They have toys that can feed a family in Africa for a year. They won't do it. So it is a low, miserable, envy-driven philosophy. The whole Democratic Party has become beholden to this philosophy. The Democratic Party used to be about the small guy, about the working guy. At least that's what they said. And now there's no work in the working guy. There's no work in the Democratic Party. Well, there's nobody paying in.
There is one guy left who's still for the working guy. And I'll tell you, when I first thought of this show topic, Bill, I thought you would actually celebrate the fact that Senator Sanders is telling the truth, because he's already proposed a climate change program that's going to cost some $16 trillion. And he's proposed Medicare for all. And so at least he's being honest that you got to pay for this stuff. On the other hand, Joe Biden has come out and
hold on, just real quick, because I think this is an interesting point. You say he says at least he understands you got to pay for it all. You said that he thought he might raise $4 trillion off of this, 4 or 5, something like that.
Well, in 10 years.
In 10 years.
Take a few
sure, of course.
To pay
so let's just give him the benefit of the doubt and say he raises $5 trillion. He's going to raise $5 trillion, but he's going to spend $16 trillion. That puts him $11,000 billion in the hole. So I'm not impressed by the whole, well, he's at least got a plan for revenue, but please continue.
Well, I don't think that Senator Sanders is suggesting this is his final proposal for raising revenue. But in any case, former Vice President Joe Biden has now come out and slapped out at Senator Elizabeth Warren, saying she's going to raise your taxes. Bill, is it shocking to hear Democrats tearing at each other, making claims that the other is going to raise your taxes? Or is this just the natural consequence of the programs that they're proposing?
We're back to the bell curve again. When the Democratic Party was more or less saying they could be on the side of we need to raise taxes for government revenues in order to pay for social programs like welfare and Social Security and all the rest of it. But as this thing continues to spiral out of control and just fall into the abyss, like Gandalf just a few feet behind, as this entire thought process called progressivism falls off the cliff, it takes with it, it's like whoosh, and takes with it the middle. And so as the entire bell curve of left-wing progressivism moves further to the left, the guys who are on the sane side of this bell curve find themselves trying to stretch themselves out and get to a place where they can put an anchor down. So now he's using what I think is really the best argument I've ever heard in terms of which people to put into office, and that is they're going to take more of your money. Let me just wrap this up by saying Bernie Sanders is proposing a tax on wealth, and come as a complete surprise to many of our viewers, but I 100% support a tax on wealth. 100% support it. I think it's the only tax there should be. And I think this tax on wealth should be levied every time somebody buys something, that everybody in the country pays the same rate, just like they do in a shopping line at the grocery store. Nobody gets to look in the wallet of the guy in front of them and say, hey, you got more money than I do. You pay more of my taxes. Nope. Everybody pays a flat 11% or 15% or whatever the number is. And if you want to tax wealth, then a sales tax or the flat tax, whatever you want to look at it, that's the way to fairly, if you want to take actual wealth. When you tax income, you're not taxing the people that have billions of dollars. They don't go to the office and the amount of money that they get as income is trivial, because they have everything they need in other companies. I've said it 100 times, but Matt Damon said, hey, why don't you raise taxes? And I'm a rich guy. I'm going to pay more in taxes. So look at me. Look how virtuous I am. You're not paying more in taxes, Matt. You don't get a check for $12 million when you make a movie. The check goes to MD Enterprises, and they pay you $100,000, $200,000 spending money, and they buy your house, they buy your car, they buy your travel, they do everything. I'm not suckered by this argument. But a flat tax, a sales tax, is unavoidable. Not only do rich people pay a sales tax, but poor people do too. And not only do rich people pay sales tax, but so do illegal aliens, and so do drug dealers, and so does everybody else. So to that degree, I'm for it. But Bernie Sanders is not only an awful person, he's an awful person who comes off like an awful person.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are grateful to the members at BillWhittle.com who have made it possible for us to do this show. It occurred to me while Bill was talking that if we had enough of those members here, then Bill and I may at some point have enough money to help sustain Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren's confiscatory tax rates and the government programs. So I guess this is just a plea from us to you.
For social justice.
Yes, for social justice, that you would become a member at BillWhittle.com. So eventually, these two American citizens could become wealthy enough to fund Medicare for all and the taking of your guns and all the other programs that are going to be necessary during the next administration. Thank you to the members of BillWhittle.com for making this possible. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks.
Now we got to go sell some blood.
That's just the plasma. I'm keeping the whole cells.